how do we create in-person spaces so that people feel wanted, welcomed, included, and like they want to be there? I think that that's really the work. And I think that we can come up with all kinds of reasons for people not coming into the office that we want. But I think the real issue here is, do I really feel like that's where I'm wanted? Do I feel a deep sense of belonging and connection when I am in person with these people? And does that value proposition, is it significantly better than what I would get over screens? And I think the role of leaders is to make that value proposition for being in person such that that is where people more often than not would choose to be.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Simply Augmented, and I'm excited that you are tuning in to Shift, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Jyarland Daniels as our guest. Jyarland is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Niantic, the makers of Pokemon Go, and has extensive experience working at the NAACP and thinking about civil rights and culture in the workplace. During our conversation with Jyarland, we explore her background and experience in the corporate world as a former employee at Hallmark Cards, Johnson & Johnson, and the Ford Motor Company. She shares insights on what it takes to succeed and thrive in corporate culture and collaborate with colleagues while bringing your true self to the workplace. If you're someone interested in how culture and diversity plays into our experience in the office and affects our career development, you won't want to miss this episode. It's an honor to have her on our podcast, and we can't wait to learn more from her and her experiences. Let's get to it. All right. Jyarland, thank you for being on the show. Super excited to talk to you today.
I am really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like all shows, I want to start things out by reading back to you your experience. If I get anything wrong, just let me know, and you can correct me. It is an amazing background. Started working at Johnson & Johnson. From there, marketing manager at Ford Motor Company, lifestyle public relations manager at Bentley Motors, summer law clerk for Chief Justice Gerald E. Rosen. That must have been really interesting. From there, executive director at the Detroit Truth and Reconciliation Commission, director of marketing and communications at Race Forward, then did a bunch of work for the NAACP, the Legal Defense and Education Fund. And then you became the founder and president of Harriet Speaks, which provides a bunch of services around DEI and HR. And we're going to definitely get into that. I'm really interested in that consultancy. Then finally, currently, the director of diversity and inclusion at Niantic, which is a company that I know very well. Did I miss anything?
Almost. There's one thing at the beginning. I started my professional career at Hallmark Cards in Kansas City.
Tell me more about that.
I loved that and still do have a great love for that company. And I think in so many ways, what I learned there has carried forward into my thinking about what culture looks like, this idea that companies can have compassion, touch on our emotions and move us in important ways. And I also will say a couple of things happened for me at Hallmark Cards. Number one, I really did learn to understand the importance of being as close to headquarters as you can when you're working with a company, especially starting out. I was really fortunate. I was actually a summer intern for several years in college, and then I came on full time. And I was in a program that was reserved for MBAs. And at the time, I only had an undergrad. Being surrounded by these MBAs really helped me think about going to business school. So I was on a rotational program. So one of my rotations was in their entrepreneurial business unit. And I think that is where I started developing this love for entrepreneurship and even finding ways to move fast within large companies.
Yeah, that was the spark. Huh?
Yeah, that was good.
What was the first job that you ever had that you got paid for?
I was very young, and I mean like elementary school.
You really were an entrepreneur.
When I tell you this story, I played the piano as a young girl growing up in a small town in Kansas. There was a woman in our church. She paid me $5 a week to play the piano in our evening church services.
Amazing.
And she would write me a check every week for $5. And she required that I set up a checking account.
Nice.
That was the first job I ever had.
I love that story.
Boaz, there's so much, there's so much that I learned. And I think that it's so great to have conversations like this because they really help you to think, full circle
Yeah.
about where you started and who you are and how you got there.
That leads me to my next question because I want to know what your parents did for work and if work was something that was talked about at home. Is that something that was talked about at the dinner table? Like, what were the values around work? How did that show up for you as kids?
That is something that I am increasingly eager to talk about, particularly in the D&I space. I think that we all have lots of different types of families and family arrangements. I grew up in the foster care system and I lived from ages 1 through 18 in 10 different foster homes.
Wow.
And so there wasn't a lot of conversation about work. However, there was an ethic, right? So what I knew was that I had a responsibility to work hard.
Definitely.
What that had to look like, that wasn't really communicated. I found myself not having that in some of the homes I lived in. One was an exception, or actually probably two. And so I found myself kind of looking at other people. And so I would have friends and I would look at what their parents were doing and some of the conversations that they would have. It's a really difficult question to answer. However, I am so grateful that I had those experiences because they've really shaped me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is incredible. It's not the same answer for everybody. It's not an easy answer for everybody.
Yeah.
But it kind of leads me to something that I was going to ask you later, but it's as you've gotten older, what kind of mentors have shown up for you? Who in your life has been a mentor that you can talk about? I mean, one of the things, and the reason why I always ask this to everybody is a lot of young people have communicated to me about how mentorship has really been lost for them as they work from home and that it's been a struggle to find people to support them. And so I always like to know who in your life was that person for you?
It's really something that I think a lot about. I think that for me, I've developed a very broad definition of mentoring. And I think that's going to be important for all of us in society. There was a time when we thought about mentorship in a very formal way, meaning that it was kind of an exchange, like, will you be my mentor? Yes, I will. And these are the number of times I will meet with you, and here are the things that we will discuss. I think mentorship is more than that. A
Yes.
lot of mentors I've had did not even realize there's that. And I think the other thing is I've also been mentored in terms of like watching and observing people and thinking about what not to do.
Hmm.
And I think I've always been a student of people, and that means across cultures, races, across geographies. And I think when we look at kind of life as our classroom, mentors are all around us. However, there are probably two people who I would identify very formally as mentors. One, an undergraduate professor I had at the University of Kansas. Her name is Dr. Renata Maidalton. She was really a pioneer in the space of diversity and inclusion. She established a scholarship for underrepresented students at the University of Kansas. And a part of that scholarship, it wasn't just monetary. There was a requirement that we meet with her on a regular basis and not just talk about our grades, but we received life coaching. We were exposed to cultural events and things that many of us had not experienced prior to being a part of that scholarship program. Dr. Maidalton and the Multicultural Business Scholars Program started at the University of Kansas was definitely a source of mentorship for me. I think fondly about Hallmark Cards because I'll never forget that I found a mentor in the CEO simply because I just asked him questions and I was willing to be very honest and open. And for whatever reason, I was never worried or afraid about rank or status.
Hmm.
I just felt like they have information and I need to know things. So, and I quickly realized that role of a chief executive is probably one of the loneliest you can find in a company.
Definitely.
And I think that he was a mentor to me, but in some ways, I provided kind of an unvarnished, just not having an agenda kind of like experience with him as well. And I think that that's also what mentorship looks like is there's this reciprocity that
Yeah, it
happens.
sounds like that was a good partnership. And it's amazing that you had the astuteness at the time at that age because you were younger to be able to feel open to talk and ask questions in that way. I mean, it's a good life lesson.
It's so funny. I don't know if it's astuteness. I think that we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
Kids are the most open and brave creatures we know until they have experiences in life that teach them not to be that way.
Hmm. That's so true.
Yeah, it would just really do us all well to really embrace that kind of openness. And I think I have definitely benefited from that at different points in
It
my life.
sounds like your mentors influenced the work that you're doing at Harriet Speaks. I want to hear more about Harriet Speaks because I know that you're coaching, you're advising, and you're doing lots of different consultancy. Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think like most entrepreneurs, we create businesses because we feel like we can uniquely do something or we have a perspective that's not being reflected elsewhere. And for me, I created Harriet Speaks. It was really a journey now that I think about it. I had finished my MBA and I had finished law school. And I had worked for a couple of racial justice organizations. And so I was really committed to civil rights and to equity. And I will tell you, I didn't think that the organizations that I had worked with, and even others that I hadn't, I didn't think that they were doing it quite right, if I can be so bold. And I wanted to try to do it a different way. I wanted to bring all of my skill sets to the work of diversity and inclusion. I had a business background, I had a marketing background, a communications background, I was a civil rights attorney. And so for me, that was like, wait a minute. But I think that if you think about some of these problems that we're facing in a different way, we might get different results. So that really led me to create Harriet Speaks. And I have to tell you, people often ask me, why is it called Harriet Speaks? It 100% is named after Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like, and I still very much feel like she was so many things. We mostly associate her with being an abolitionist, but she was also a suffragist. She was also an advocate for poor elderly people. She was also a general in the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
And she was fearless. And so I just think that what if we could talk about this work of D&I and embraced all of those things as opposed to kind of picking one. And if we were able to encourage one another to be fearless in the
I love that.
process.
Well, now I really want to know how that shows up at Niantic because now you're working at this big corporation and you're getting you're getting a chance to test some of these ideas that you have. And I know that some of your ideas are very different than others in the DEI community. I just want you to talk about how that shows up at a big company, what your experiences have been like, and what the
Mhm.
challenges are and what the exciting parts are.
I guess I would probably start by saying I was very intentional about coming to work for Niantic. There were two things that really spoke to me. One, Boaz, and I think that you and I share this view, like I think tech matters. It matters greatly. And I think that we can downplay it all we want. And I think it's easy to forget how much it matters as we're looking at some of the headlines. as it relates to layoffs. But I think that this sector in particular matters greatly, and there is a huge opportunity to increase its representation and its inclusion. So there was that. But Niantic is something special, even within the tech space. As I think about some of my experiences that you identified, what I think many of them have in common, particularly in the racial and social justice space, Boaz, they are heavy. They are really, really heavy. I mean, working for as the head of communications and marketing for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, that's heavy. Some of the work that I was able to do with Chief Justice Rosen, that was heavy. And even, working for Race Forward, what I saw in Niantic was this opportunity to infuse ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion with joy.
Yes.
Joy. I think that all people, and especially those who have been historically marginalized, need joy, right? And I think that the mission of Niantic, inspiring people to explore the world together, wow. Talking about coming together and getting outside and playing after we've been really kind of separated from one another is critical. I think it's necessary. I think it's foundational. And so it's not just working in tech, it's working in tech in a company that has a mission of joy and coming together and getting outside that you can really really get behind. You alluded to how I see diversity and inclusion a little differently. And you're right. I had the amazing privilege. One of my experiences is I was an exchange student to Japan. I spent a year in Japan in high school, a semester in college, and then I minored in Japanese. And I think diversity and inclusion is also global. And I think this idea that it has only a US centric lens causes us to miss many opportunities to connect with people around the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and Niantic, not only is it a global company in terms of our games, in terms of our players, but Japanese companies, whether we're talking about our relationship with the Pokemon company or with Nintendo, those relationships are very, very important to us. And so it really allows me to lean into this belief that I have that we all need to be included and we need to understand what are different opportunities to be inclusive. What are the opportunities for diversity in other cultures as well?
As you reframe it and expand it globally, it changes the lens by which we look at some of these issues. And I wonder if you can give listeners some examples of how this is different for a lot of people when you talk about it in this way.
We live in an increasingly global world. And to frame everything from a US centric context means that we're missing out on opportunities to understand our shared humanity. For example, I might say this. I might say there are some issues that are particularly germane in the US where people in Japan or where New Zealand, for example, they may not understand it in the
Yeah,
same way.
context is different.
Yes, the context is different. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It means that number one, there is an opportunity to educate. But number two, it means there's an opportunity for us to learn. As I work with my colleagues in New Zealand, I am learning about the Maori people who have been historically marginalized. The question then becomes, what does diversity and inclusion at Niantic look like where it also creates space to have conversations about the Maori people? And so having this broad context, I think, really helps us do the thing that I think is really the work, and that is resist all of the forms of tribalism in all of the different ways that they show up.
I really appreciate that. I think that's an interesting perspective. And, one other thing that most of these listeners know, Niantic is the company that makes Pokemon Go. And I've spent my career building virtual reality and augmented reality productivity tools and applications. And you're one of the first people on the show that works for a company that really doubles down on mobile augmented reality, where it's important that you are in a place. And I think back to the early days of Pokemon Go, where people were showing up at parks, people had their phones out, they were uncovering all these things. And this was pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, we live in a different world, a world where Pokemon Go was first released to the public. And it does require that we get back together and that we get to a place. I've been thinking a lot about remote and hybrid work and what that does to the culture of a company. I know you think about it too. Let's talk a little bit about that. The situation we find ourselves in. You and I are talking via screens right now, but we're connecting. But now people are coming back into the office. Certainly has an impact on company culture. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you think about remote work?
Absolutely. So, before I do that, I want to just say that I had an experience of going to one of our Pigo Go Fest events in Las Vegas. And
Yes.
I will tell you that people are still coming out in large numbers in parks to play
Amazing.
Pokemon Go. When I joined the company, people talked about the diversity that you see at our live events. Honestly, I don't know that I was fully prepared for it. I saw people of all ages, of all races, from all parts of the world. I even saw people who were in wheelchairs being pushed by close friends or family members so that they too could play the game. And so I think that our games do have a unique ability to bring people together, and that's what we
Hmm.
intend to do. In terms of remote work and what that means for culture, we will forevermore live in a hybrid environment, forevermore. Niantic is a hybrid first company, meaning that some days, employees are working from home, and then some days they're working in the office. That being said, I personally am of the very strong belief that nothing can take the place of connecting in person. So, yes, you and I are talking across screens. However, our very first connection was very much in person, right?
Yeah,
And it
that's
was a
right.
good connection, and it was an instant and a genuine connection. And I don't know if the very first time we met had been across the screen, if it would have been the same.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, and I think that some of that is lost on people that have never met each other before in the
It
workplace.
is. And so I think this is also where diversity and inclusion has a role to play. How do we create in person spaces so that people feel wanted, welcomed, included, and like they want to be there? I think that that's really the work. And I think that we can come up with all kinds of reasons for people not coming into the office that we want. But I think the real issue here is, but do I really feel like that's where I'm wanted? Do I feel a deep sense of belonging and connection when I am in person with these people? And does that value proposition, is it significantly better than what I would get over screens? And I think the role of leaders is to make that value proposition for being in person such that that is where people more often than not would choose to be.
And I also think too that that feeling of belonging and leadership's ability to execute on that is something that is really, really important in these times. And I agree. I don't think hybrid is going away. I think that's here to stay. How do we get people to feel that feeling and want to show up for each other and for the work? It's a really, really hard thing to do.
I think we have to give ourselves some grace. And Boaz, what I mean when I say that is we spent about 3 years away from most people. And we spent about 3 years believing that other people were
Hmm.
in a danger and a threat to us. Another person could actually result in my sickness or my death, or the sickness or death of someone in my family. And if we think about it like that, that was a hard shift for people to make, that this other person is
Yeah.
now like dangerous, and you've got to like have this mask on. And so where I think grace comes in is understanding that just as that shift was hard, the shift of now seeing you as someone who is safe, someone who I can trust, someone who I can build with and create with, that shift too is going to take time. But we have to remember that that's our natural inclination, I think, as humans.
It's fascinating that we went through that time. And that really is the way that you felt when you were walking down the street and you saw
Yeah,
somebody. It almost is feels like a dream a little bit.
it does.
Here's another question for you. These days I've been really obsessed with productivity tools, productivity hacks, the different things that people do at work to feel connected and focused on what they're doing. Do you have anything special that you like to do as it relates to work that helps you with your mindfulness or your productivity or your
Okay,
well-being?
I do. And I am so sheepishly responding to that. So I use a particular planner, and it's called the High Performance Planner. What I like about it is a requirement in order for the system to work, that you set out every day with your intentions. And so it asks prompts like, how are you feeling? Like, what does success look like? And then at the end of the day, you actually are then evaluating yourself and what you did based on what you said you were going to do. And then how are you feeling? And I think
Oh, that's powerful.
it really is. And I think that most of us think about planning in terms of like what we do at the beginning, and we set out these intentions. But that retrospective, that relatively immediate kind of assessment so that you can adapt and modify and adjust is really powerful.
So every day, at the end of the day, you look at it
I
and
do.
that can kind of inform your intention for the next day.
I
That is
do.
great.
Now, I think productivity, just like learning, I think it's as much as what we should start doing as much as what we should stop doing. In case anyone wants to know what I think Slack is the bane of all of our existence. I do. I'm sorry. I hope you don't have any
That's
friends.
okay. No, that's okay. We like honesty.
I think that constant interruption, and what I've learned to do is to pause my notifications.
That is a good hack.
It is. I think needing and being able to focus like really, really matters. So that's a hack. Okay, can I tell you another hack?
Yeah, please.
One of the things, Boaz, that I am most passionate about is coaching. I think coaching is critical to D&I. If we are not careful, so much of what we do is performative, but we're not having the real like one-on-one conversations and asking people to really probe and like examine themselves and why they think what they think. So that's why I think coaching is really important, and how I really got into being an executive coach as a part of my D&I practice and tool set. But I am a fan of, and this is so not a promotion, it's so not, but it's true. So I'm a fan of Clifton Strengths.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so Clifton Strengths it's an assessment um, developed by the Gallup organization, and the idea is, yeah, we all have weaknesses and we have things that we don't do well, but we're actually going to be much more productive, much more effective if we spend our time focusing on the things that we do really, really well.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I love that.
Yeah. And so I think as a result of that, when we talk about burnout, burnout happens when we're not playing to our strengths, when we're not doing the things that we're naturally good at. And I happen to think that no matter what task you have, you can think about, well, what are my strengths? And how do I bring my strengths, or one or more of them, to bear as I tackle this project and as I tackle this work. So, another thing that I really try to do with the level of intentionality is think about, okay, Yarland, here are your top 5 strengths, and here are the things that you have to get done in a day. Which of your strengths are you going to really lean into to be able to do this so that it doesn't feel like a complete chore and you end up feeling like invigorated as opposed to drained?
I'll tell you why I like that. So many young people are taught early on to focus on the things that they're not good at. And everyone has superpowers. Double down on your superpowers can really change the way that you look at all sorts of things in life, but especially work. So I really appreciate that.
It is so true, and it's counterintuitive to how we are reared in this society. And it's funny because I actually just talked about this with a group today. I think it's particularly germane for women and underrepresented minorities because these are groups who have been given messages intentionally or unintentionally that there's something not quite right with you. Here's something that you need to fix to feel like you are
Mhm.
enough, right? And so the strengths paradigm completely counters that. So that's why it's really relevant for that group. However, it's also relevant for everyone because how we treat other people is 100% a function of how we feel about ourselves. And if we feel like we are not enough, if I am a white male, for example, and I feel like I am not enough on a very, very subconscious level, then that may show up in how I treat other people. If I am a Black woman and I am not treating other people very well, it's a function of how I feel about myself. And so if we
For
can
sure.
all do that work of feeling better about ourselves and understanding our superpower, to your point, wow, doesn't that really translate in terms of like our relationships and how we treat other people? I think it does.
I agree. All right. I like to end the show with a question. Describe the future of work in 2 words.
Humanity and connection.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I learned a ton talking to you, but more importantly, I feel energy after this conversation. And it's late in the day, but I feel a lot of energy, and I appreciate you and I appreciate your time. So thank you, Yarlin, for being on the show.
Boaz, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I just enjoyed meeting you in person and remotely, and I am just honored.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Jyarland Daniels as our guest in today's episode. Yarland's passion for people and company culture is a testament to the work she has done throughout her career as a leader, coach, and civil rights champion. If you want to learn more about Jyarland and her work, you can find her on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you are interested in the power of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, you should definitely connect with her and keep up with her posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on our show, and I'm excited about the ones joining in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to follow us for more exciting interviews about the shifting future of work. The Shift podcast is sponsored by Simply Augmented and produced by Boaz Ashkenazi. Audio production and engineering by Dave Angel of the Monkey Pants. Our theme music is by Dave Angel. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Shift podcast.